we're back with Zachary again. Zach, like, let's talk about more specific in about country that you have helped.
Right.
So,
I've had clients from most Asian countries. The more modernized and, let's say, westernized, probably the harder it is to qualify these days
as-
for asylum. Probably South Korea and Japan, Singapore have a harder time in qualifying for
Philippines?
asylum. Philippines, I would put in the borderline.
Okay.
Thailand, I'd probably put in a borderline because there's been a lot of exposure in those countries to Western gay communities, I would say, and there probably isn't as repressive government as you would find in historically countries like Vietnam, China, maybe Mongolia, Indonesia, and Malaysia. Despite recent gains, historically, the governments have been more repressive. The recent gains, I think, is very important to discuss because U.S. immigration authorities are going to be well aware of what's going on currently in those countries. And they often solicit reports about current events in those countries for asylum cases. And they ask their local people from the Department of State to investigate as well. Not necessarily individual cases, but general country conditions. So anybody who's going to bring themselves forward and apply for asylum has to expect questions about current events. And a lot of times there's misleading information. The fact that there might be a gay pride parade doesn't mean there aren't still problems and gay bashing by the police.
Right.
Certainly, the countries, and there's a very political element to asylum because it's from the government, even though officially there's not. The reality is, countries that the United States recognizes as repressive, like China, generally will have a worse reputation in the eyes of the adjudicator, and therefore more likely to they're more likely to accept an asylum claim from a country that has a worse reputation. Individuals who are jailed in China have a more likelihood of being tortured or being harmed in jail, for example. And so individuals who have a history of run-ins with the police based on having a gay identity in China probably have a better chance of receiving asylum. And certainly I've seen clients who report a history of run-ins with the police, questions based on suspicious activity, who they're seeing in the parks, who they're living with, and whether if they don't have the right documents to be living in that area. The police will often use that as a pretext for homophobic harassment, and which could rise the level of persecution when there's a more threatening aspect. Threats of jail, threats of harm, to the point of physical abuse. If somebody has a history of that occurrence and can show it's because of my sexual orientation that that's happening, then if they're from a country with a notoriously repressive government or historically repressive, like China and certain other Asian countries, then the chance of asylum is higher. But at the same time, they're going to have to account for, is there another part of the country that you could go to and be safe? Could you go live in the big city and avoid the repressive atmosphere you felt in your hometown? And that's often a difficult issue that requires a certain amount of investigation. If I encounter a client that I don't know the history of that government before, I will often consult with an expert, a university professor or someone who's studied the region, and say, what's currently going on? And they can often present two sides to the story to counter what immigration might think, which is, oh, if there's a gay pride parade, everything must be fine now, which isn't always the case.
Correct. Yeah, I can speak about my own country, which is from Indonesia. Now we do have a little bit of this gay parade, that kind of thing. But again, that doesn't mean, like what you said, people still struggle, and some governments kind of like start getting very open-minded. However, the society, we do have the front, we call it the front Muslim hardcore there. They always go, persecute all these people as well. And so, yeah, those kind of things, I guess it's a bit more complicated too.
And that's a really good point, which is that to qualify for asylum under U.S. law, it doesn't have to just be the government authorities that are the ones doing the harm or the persecuting. It could be independent elements within the society where the government simply doesn't have the wherewithal, does not or cannot, for whatever reason, control. So if an individual is afraid of being harassed, more than harassed really, being beaten up, being physically assaulted by homophobic elements, but they simply can't go to the police for protection because the police won't do anything or might perpetuate further homophobic harm, that is that person would probably qualify for asylum if they meet certain other requirements. And so it's not just what the police do or don't do, it's often what the other members of society who haven't quite gotten the message, shall we say.
Correct. And we've been talking a lot about the sexual orientation base. But again, last time I remember that my attorney actually asked me, is there any other thing that you get persecuted for? So what is those?
Right. Well, transgendered individuals certainly could be recognized as a social group. And oftentimes, the transgendered individuals will have a different experience than a gay or lesbian or bisexual individual in a given country. They'll be treated differently, especially in countries where gender roles are very traditionally prescribed. And so you might have a country, I think like Indonesia, from the Indonesian clients I've spoken to, where the life that one leads as a gay man might be very different from the life that a transgendered male to female individual would lead. And there may be different interactions with the authorities, and there may be different interactions with the public. And so a given individual might have a different claim depending on who it is they're afraid of and why. Certainly, the United States immigration law will recognize the category of transgendered individuals of having a unique experience. And so people who identify themselves as transgendered, if they've had problems based on that status, should not hesitate to indicate that when seeking advice initially about whether or not that status could help them with an asylum case. The United States immigration law has also recognized HIV status as a category within society, because we know many times people, there's a perception, accurate or not, that HIV positive individuals and gay men are a very similar group. Not always true. But people in traditional societies who are known to be HIV positive often suffer the same kind of persecution that the gay male community does. Right. And so that's an overlap where there could be individual differences.
Yeah. How long does it take you, the process for all these things? People will ask me, how long? Is it 10 years, 5 years, that kind?
There's a big range. I mean, one very important thing is that you have to be inside the United States to apply for asylum. Okay. Second of all,
year, right?
Exactly. Second of all, you have to apply within a year of entering, or you have to fit into one of the exceptions. Now, people who come here legally on visas and they're in school generally aren't going to be required to apply while they have legal status. But anytime there's a change in the situation, like your visa status is ending, then you don't get a year from that point. That's a common misconception. You have to apply in what they call a reasonable period of time, which could be as short as 3 months. So there's a very serious question for people who have been in the United States beyond the year, and especially if they no longer have valid immigration status, of whether they're going to be found to qualify or not. You need to, again, talk to an expert and see if there might be other reasons that you might not qualify. There might have been a change so that you do qualify for the exception, or if there's been no change, that you wouldn't qualify for asylum. The process itself, once you apply, can go quickly. You're going to get interviewed quickly, less than 3 months, and you could get your answer very quickly if it's successful.
Oh, okay.
For those who are not successful initially, the process can drag out for years, however.
I see.
So there is a range.
That's kind of like the clue. Can it be like that? If I know you get processed quick, that means you might win the case, and then if it's got dragged,
you'll know quickly if you're going to win right away.
Okay.
And if you're not going to, and you have to have a case with the judge, that will take longer.
All right. Okay, we'll be right back into deeper conversation and how to find a good lawyer or not. Okay, all right, we'll be right back.